Good morning. My name is John Stremsterfer, and I am the President and CEO of the Community Foundation for the Land of Lincoln. We are the host organization for a project here known locally as the Next 10. And this is our third in a series of what we are calling the Next 10 extra webinars to really further the discussion that's come about in our community about big ideas for the central Illinois region. So welcome. Before we get into today's program, I just want to give everyone an update on the Next 10 project. Currently, we are in the phase of sorting through the hundreds of ideas still that were submitted back in late 2020. And it is getting to the point where we're hopeful to release a report to the community here in the coming weeks. We are aiming towards sometime before the end of April to announce dozens of projects out into the community that citizens wish to pursue on all fronts. So stay tuned. I know I've been saying that for a while now, but there are people hard at work, and I'm very excited about many of the projects and programs that we hope to announce here very, very soon. I'm particularly excited about today's discussion, which is about Illinois State Fairgrounds. Full disclosure, I grew up a block away from the State Fairgrounds. It's been a big part of my life, like it has so many people here in central Illinois and throughout the state of Illinois. I fondly go to the State Fair every year to get my Vosa's corn dog religiously. It opens a week or two before the State Fair for any of you looking to get your fix a little before everyone else. I always go there for my birthday. Also, as a child, I'll never forget, I could literally open my window at night laying in bed and listen to Willie Nelson from the grandstand performing, and pretty much every year during the Thompson administration, Al. So it's really near and dear to a lot of people's hearts. And today I look forward to this discussion of how we can even further activate it year round. Just one housekeeping thing before I toss it over to Al. If you have any questions during the webinar, there is a functionality on Zoom where you can submit those. We will do our best to get to those. I know Al has a lot of prepared questions for the panelists today, and provided time, we'll get to any questions we can. So with that, I'd like to introduce our moderator for today's discussion, Al Grosball. Professionally, Al is the legislative director for the Environmental Law and Policy Center, but affectionately for me, he's the vice chair of the board of the Community Foundation. So with that, Al, I'll toss it to you.
Thank you, John. Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to what we hope will be a vibrant discussion about the Illinois State Fair and its importance to central Illinois. We have three excellent panelists who will discuss the potential of state fairs and answer questions about how we can boost the economic and social impacts of the Illinois State Fairgrounds. As John noted, the Community Foundation for the Land of Lincoln has engaged the public to get your ideas about how we can best improve our region and enhance the economic and cultural vitality of our community. In looking at the public comments about the State Fair and listening to citizens, themes resonated loud and clear. First, the public recognizes the importance of the Illinois State Fair and respects the rich traditions that emanate from the fairgrounds. Second, people believe the fair and the fairgrounds can offer more. The State Fair provides 10 days of fun and economic vitality, and fair officials have been very aggressive at marketing the fair for other events. But there is a sense that we can do more to have year-round events at the fair, and we're going to talk about that today. Illinois has conducted state fairs since the 1850s. And since 1890, it's been based in Springfield. More than 500,000 people a year, on average, attend the fair, and studies have estimated that that 10-day event alone has an economic impact of nearly $90 million. We are especially fortunate that our fairgrounds can boast of having many of its original buildings that have been restored and preserved for future generations. These historic buildings and the rich traditions of the Illinois State Fair make it a unique asset for Springfield and the region. We are fortunate to have a distinguished and knowledgeable panel joining us today. So let me introduce our three panelists. First, is Jerry Costello, the Director of the Illinois Department of Agriculture. Director Costello is a lifelong resident of Illinois, having grown up in the Metro East area and attended Southern Illinois University. He served in the U.S. Army 82nd Airborne Division and is a veteran of the Gulf War. Jerry, thank you for your service.
Thank you, Al.
Director Costello was elected to the Illinois House of Representatives and served 8 years. In the House, he served as chair of the House Ag Committee. And a year ago, Governor Pritzker appointed him to be the Director of Agriculture. Cindy Hoy has been with the Indiana State Fair for more than 30 years, and she has served as the Executive Director since 2004. She was a driving force in establishing the Indiana State Fair as one of the world's premier agricultural fairs. One of her accomplishments I want to highlight was a $63 million renovation of the Indiana Farmers Coliseum, which many of you may have recently seen when it was hosting NCAA basketball games. Cindy, thank you for that.
Thank you.
Cindy's an Indianapolis native. She attended Southern Methodist University. She worked as an intern at the Texas State Fair. She was a 4-H extension officer in Wisconsin, did special events for the Wisconsin State Fair, and then she returned to the Indiana State Fair. Marla Calico is president and CEO of the International Association of Fairs and Expositions, which is headquartered in Springfield, Missouri. The association represents 1,100 expositions, agricultural fairs, and shows around the world, and also has 700 associated businesses. Marla has been in her current position for nearly a decade and has spent more than 4 decades working in fairs and in the fair and exposition industry. Prior to joining the association, Marla spent nearly 30 years working for the Ozark Empire Fair, also in Missouri. Marla is a frequent speaker at fair industry events and is regarded as one of the nation's experts on fairs and expositions. So thank you all three for joining us today, and let me move on with some questions.
Thank you.
Director Costello, let me pose this one to you. In your capacity as Agriculture Director, you oversee the Illinois State Fair. This past year has had its challenges, but looking beyond the 2020 pandemic and where we stand today and thinking about the long term, what do you believe are the 3 biggest challenges or opportunities facing the State Fair?
So Al, thank you very much. And just very quickly, and I think you covered this briefly, I was appointed to the position March 2nd. March 17th, we went into the COVID period of operation. So it's been quite different than what my expectations were coming into the position. I chaired Ag and Conservation for 5 years in the House, was a member for 8 years, and have been to the both state fairs, Springfield and DuQuoin, numerous times over the course of my life. What I will tell you, canceling the state fair, having to cancel the DuQuoin State Fair, obviously was nothing that any of us took lightly. It was a tough decision. It was the right decision done in coordination with the Illinois Department of Public Health. But since then, people, especially in the Springfield area, they saw us cancel those fairs. We had to cancel other events that are held on the fairgrounds in person. But what we have done here on the fairgrounds in Springfield, we've held testing sites for the COVID pandemic. So numerous weeks, people could come to the Illinois State Fairgrounds and be tested for COVID. And now we are currently hosting a vaccination clinic here at the Springfield Fairgrounds. So it's a mass vaccination clinic, the capacity of several thousand people a day being vaccinated right here in Springfield. So I'm very proud of the employees we have here at the Department of Agriculture. I'm proud working with the Illinois National Guard to be able to do those things under these unprecedented times. What I see as the 3 challenges And obviously there are a number of them, but the three main challenges is what does the future of events look like on our fairgrounds and in other fairgrounds throughout the country. So while I believe we all see light at the end of the tunnel right now with the vaccinations, I really, really encourage people to get vaccinated. So hopefully we can get to that herd immunity stage of 75% of people or more being vaccinated in the state of Illinois and in the country. That's extremely, extremely important. Second, just like any other state, obviously we have to look at budgetary constraints coming off of the fiscal period we did because of COVID. What will budget and funding look like? And then third, as you mentioned earlier, while the Illinois State Fairgrounds here have a very, very historical significance, it's a beautiful facility. One of the things that we do have is older buildings, older facilities that have to be maintained. We went through almost a decade without a capital bill. We did just have a capital bill in 2019. So some of that money helps us play catch up. And then people are also all too familiar with the fact that we went several years without a state budget. So maintenance is something that we're playing catch up, but we have to make sure that we're attending to as well.
Well, Jerry, we will come back to a couple of those issues as we continue the dialogue this morning. Cindy, let me turn to you if I may. The Indiana State Fair has often been described as a model of how states can maximize their facilities, a model for thinking outside the box. Now, obviously, your location helps. You're in a city of 900,000 people in a region of over 2 million, which we don't have that. But nevertheless, you guys have had great success. You have a very high reputation. What are some of the factors that have contributed to your success, and any lessons you would suggest we consider?
Well, thanks, Alan. My pleasure to be with all of you this morning. I had a chance to be on the fairgrounds, your fairgrounds property, oh gosh, maybe 12 years ago. And you are right, Jerry, it's absolutely gorgeous. It's a wonderful asset for the community. And so, I mean, I am a little cautious. Not everything is going to work that maybe has worked in Indianapolis, but maybe I can throw out some ideas that you can chew on. And so I'm here in that kind of phase of just offering new suggestions and thoughts. We have been extremely focused on our multi-use of this property, maximizing this asset, and not only for us as an anchor institution, but for the community and how it affects the community. We're really there. Our economic impact is close to 200 million in direct impact to this community, but also most importantly, it's jobs. It's 400 jobs, so it's important. It's an important asset. I think a couple of things for us is we constantly think about multi-use. It is just like we always talk about our foundation is agriculture and youth. We always talk about multi-use and maximizing that year round. So an example is we had some dormitories that were only used during the fair. They're now used as office space. We have 3 tenants that are housed in that space, and we have realigned the use during the fair into other areas. We're also using a building as a church, and when we redid the Coliseum, we looked at, okay, it has to, number one, serve our number one customer, and that's the fair and livestock, but it has to be able to have an ice plant because we got a primary tenant of a minor hockey league, and then we're also, as you spoke of, Al, with basketball. So we're constantly saying, how can a building serve multiple functions? The market segments are different. I mean, when I started here, it was every single weekend we had an antique show and a flea market. And now I think we have 1 antique show a year. So you have to constantly be creative and understanding what trends. There were trends that happened several years ago with runs and races, and that's maxed out. Now we don't have as many of those kinds of events. So you really got to pay attention to the trends. Right now, I would say the market that has evolved during COVID are youth sports, volleyball, gymnastics, cheerleading. Where high schools haven't been able to allow those events, we have found a nice little niche in that youth sports market. So it's, again, understanding the trends, thinking creatively, and thinking about it at multi-use. We're just now designing a swine barn to replace the 100-year-old building. As Jerry talked about deferred maintenance, it has seen its day. And so not only are we talking about it as a swine barn, we're also talking about an indoor track and field location. So again, maximizing that use. So a couple examples.
Good. Well, I take from that particularly the multi-use point. The other thing is also we recognize you do have some facilities on your campus that we do not have, such as the size of that indoor coliseum. Let me turn to Marla. Marla, Illinois is not the only state looking at ways to boost its state fair and the use of its grounds, and to find ways to attract additional financial support. Cindy's talked a little bit about the Indiana State Fair, but are there other states that you would have us look at that have had great success? And what advice would you have for Illinois leaders in terms of how to look at these various issues?
Thank you, Alan. Once again, thanks to all of you for the opportunity to participate today and to share a few ideas. You know, one of the fairs that comes to mind is a relative young fair, and it's the Georgia National Fair located in Perry, Georgia. It's on the major interstate that runs north and south. It's about just 2 hours south of Atlanta. That property was carved out of a soybean field, and I've had a chance to visit that fair since year number 2. All the way up until just a month ago, well, 3 weeks ago, I was on property for a meeting. It is amazing how that fairgrounds and the development has changed that community. Perry itself is only like a 16,000 population, but that fairgrounds is in use constantly. It was purpose built, which is, as we know, a disadvantage whenever we have these historic properties such as Illinois State Fair, you know, landmark type of properties. But I think it shows the power of the state getting behind a facility and putting the money into it to make it happen. It's just a tremendous success story. Another one that comes to mind, and I have to admit I'm less familiar with it, but certainly if we look at the model where the state has made the commitment to fund, would be the New York area. And of recent, for example, in 2018, they just built a $63 million exposition center, which is the largest exposition center north of New York City between Boston and Cleveland. And it's part of something like perhaps what you're doing there. It's called CNY, Central New York Rising. And it's an economic development group, and that group has received funding from the state, and they're making a huge impact. But the state alone, $63 million for that, and another $50 million for improvements on the grounds. One of the pieces of data I had was that between 2016 and 2017, the number of people attending non-fair events increased by 57%. So it's making a huge impact there on Syracuse. And if you look at Syracuse itself, the market's not perhaps that much different than Springfield, Illinois. Looking across the country, just a few more I might point out in terms of some aspects of total support that we're going to get into later in the discussion. Certainly the Iowa State Fairgrounds in Des Moines, another historic property, a
Yes. Large
property, different market area. But here we're going to talk about a little bit different. It's not part of the state in terms of the state funding, but they've got a foundation, which we're going to address. The properties in Wisconsin State Fair, New Mexico State Fair, Ohio State Fair, and then the Kentucky State Fair. And Kentucky is pretty much in its own class. They are really known more for their non-fair rentals and have purposely built that. But I will say in general, in the fair industry, the survival of the fairs is highly dependent upon non-fair rentals. And so that's certainly an area, and what a difference it makes for the communities whenever we can focus on that.
Well, those are great examples for us to think about. Thank you. Marla, you brought up the business of foundations. nonprofit foundations that reach out to try and get outside funding. I know Illinois has gone down this route also. I'm wondering if there are examples in your mind where states or exhibitions have been successful, and if there are any particularly good examples. And I would hope Cindy and Director, you would each feel like jumping in if you feel like it. But Marla, any examples people should be looking at?
Certainly. I think the one that we all look to in this industry was the #1 leader, which was the Iowa State Fair's Blue Ribbon Foundation. It was the earliest that was started, in my knowledge. It was launched in 1991. And certainly they have done tremendous amount of work. It's run by a professional staff. I pulled up a couple of pieces of information just to share with you all. Since it first launched, they have put $65 million into the Iowa State Fair property and programming. Each year they generate, no, excuse me, not each year. Since its inception, they started, for example, one little thing, you can talk about your $2 million donors, and they have those, right? That they name the buildings, create the buildings. But if you would go to their report and look at the number of people that give $100 a year, it goes on for pages and pages. They do events. But one of the neat things that I think reflects the entire state is on your taxes as an Iowa citizen, you can make a contribution in the corn dog checkoff. The corn dog checkoff. They've raised $2 million since the 1990s just doing that. So it's a little thing, but it's great. They are the largest. Net assets are north of $7.5 million. The other two I think that come to mind, certainly Indiana State Fair, and I won't speak for Cindy because they have a great foundation there. The Minnesota State Fair has a relatively young foundation, but it's been very aggressive in all that they do. It is a $3.6 million asset foundation. Again, they have this mix of the large named money donors, as well as just individual citizens who make these commitments. But I did just a little quick research. If we look at state fairs that would typically be in the general model of the Illinois State Fair, the Indiana State Fair, there are 14 that have some sort of a foundation. Most of them are relatively new. So this is the new wave where they're working.
Good. Well, thanks. We have a corn checkoff in Illinois, but we don't have a corn dog checkoff. Maybe we could come up with a cotton candy checkoff. But anyway, Cindy, thoughts about the foundation question?
Yeah, our foundation is relatively new. We developed it, I think it was 2006, 2007, but it was a primary driver to our Coliseum renovation. As you referenced, the $63 million project. We raised $10 million ourselves from it. What we found with the foundation is that if there is a specific cause, people will rally for that specific cause more than just, Iowa's found incredible success doing that, but we've had to, so if we're raising money for what used to be the sale of champions, then people just jump on board with it. If it is a bricks and mortar type project, that also we had raised money for a covered bridge and a number of different things. And we have since created a dinner where all the funding goes to support the 4-H livestock kids. And so we keep learning. I mean, we're still in our infancy, but it is something that is very much of an asset for these fairs to have a foundation.
But the lesson seems to be to make it for a specific project or a specific theme.
That's what we found success with. Yes.
Yeah. Jerry, thoughts about the foundation?
So Al, and one thing that you may not know and others may not as well. So in 2016, Representative Butler, who represents Springfield, brought the bill out for the Fairground Foundation. I was the chief co-sponsor of that bill as the chair of ag. And if I'm sure you remember that 15-16 time period was a pretty hyper partisan time period. So I was actually the only Democrat who was a co-sponsor of that bill. And if that tells you anything about how I feel about foundations, the public-private partnership, And I think we all saw that monies were not being put into these facilities. And, especially knowing that a lot of these buildings are older, it was something that had to be done, had to be created. Number one, I want to thank John Slayton, who's the president of our Illinois State Fair Foundation. He does a great job, as well as the foundation. But it's very, very young, being formed in 2016. That being said, there are a number of things that the foundation has helped us do, anything from lighting to fans in some of the buildings. Right now, they're getting ready to pay for seating in the Coliseum. So I think we're off to the right start. It's a very young foundation, but it's absolutely someplace that I am concentrating, trying to help and recruit some more, hopefully, donors and private partners.
Well, we're certainly familiar with John's good work and appreciate what John Slayton's been doing. So thanks. Let me turn to this question about expanding use on the fairgrounds. And Cindy, I want to turn to you and ask you, we've heard a little bit about some of the expanded use on your fairgrounds. What do you think the key is for expanding fairground use and making the fair more economically dynamic? And again, I would hope Marla and Jerry would jump in on this, but what are your thoughts about what the keys are to expanding that use, particularly to the non-fair time? We focus on 10 days, but there's another 355 days.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is understanding that is your vision within your institution and your organization. And if that is the vision that is set out, whether it's from the governor or whether it's from your board or commission, really to establish that direction of, for us, it just makes good economic sense, having that revenue stream throughout the year versus a single time. We've done strategic planning, which is, I'm sure everybody is familiar with that, and develop a business plan, but it is looking at the property maybe with a different lens than we've looked at it before. So instead of thinking about it just as, Easter Sunday crowds, we look at it as, what else can we do with this building, and look at it a little bit differently than we have before. But it is very much a strategy and a vision that we carved out years ago, with the end game to start funding some of our capital projects ourselves, instead of being so reliant on the state to help us. So we have this vision, we have a roadmap, and it's just, so it's thinking differently. Instead of having a horse barn sit empty, there is a thing called last mile in the supply chain, that maybe the building can be used 3 months out of the year as storage in a supply chain last mile. So just constantly thinking differently than maybe we had before.
Sure.
And then the other thing I would just compound that with, I think then you in everything that we're talking about, it's telling that story and putting people behind it, like hearing how Jerry helped develop that foundation. Hearing John talk about his memories of listening to hearing Willie Nelson. So like having all those parts and into a story that you can keep on telling.
Good. Marla, thoughts from your perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. And to build a little bit about what Cindy has talked about, the real success stories come when that fair as an organization looks at this stream of activity and rental business as a separate business. And you think about the assets that you have to deploy before you ever begin to think about infrastructure improvements. What is it? You've got multiple entries so you can handle traffic. You have scads of parking, right? You generally have some good access throughout with the arteries and things like that of traffic throughout. You may even have staff that already knows how to do critical event business. So, but you have to treat it like a business. You can't just like open up and give them the key and say, go have it. You have to run this like a business model. And the fairs that do that, where they have dedicated event managers, maybe that event manager has another role during the fair, but you focus on running it as a business. You focus on what, and maybe just starting sometimes with what do we have to deploy that fits a unique market. At the fair I managed one time, we had an opportunity for a Midwest regional timber show because we had both inside facilities where they could do trade show booths, but we had outside space where they could do demos. The convention center downtown couldn't handle that, but we could. And we had a secure perimeter. So think about how you can deploy for the unique event set, but also run it like a business and then plow that money back in to improve the facilities. One of my favorite stories is visiting at Indiana State Fair in the dairy barn and looking at the renovations. And it was this, one time I saw it was this huge lawn and garden show. I mean, it was like the best of the best lawn and garden shows that was taking place. But then I went back another time and it was being used, Cindy, I think for testing, like some type of, there were tables everywhere so that you could spread people out. So, you know, here you've got the weekend business, but then you've got midweek business that you can build on. You have to really be creative about taking the space, which is a tremendous asset, and then deploying it in a unique way.
Yeah. Jerry, thoughts about this question of expanding use of the fairgrounds?
Al, I couldn't agree more. And it's something, you know, as I said, I came in March 2nd, March 17th, we went into the COVID period of operation. So the last 6 or 8 months, some of it's been improvise, adapt, and overcome, and dealing with food supply chain, a lot of issues that, you know, maybe we didn't expect to deal with. But one thing that I can tell you, the Illinois State Fairgrounds here, especially for horse shows, is just an extremely unbelievable venue. We have the World Palomino show. We are just landed the World Appaloosa show, which will come in 2022. We had an antique truck show that was coming this year, which would have brought in tens of thousands of people. They actually rented out the entire fairgrounds. That unfortunately was postponed to 2022. They do it every 2 years. It's the largest one in the country. So things like that you have to do. Obviously, we have the Springfield Mile, which you know, I think pretty much everyone in Springfield is familiar with. It's a historical event. But you know, the question is, how do you bring more of those types of events to facilities like this? How do you highlight it? You do it well, and then you know, the networking, word of mouth, some of it, you know, especially between groups like horse shows. You do those well and they build upon themselves. Another thing that we have here at the fairgrounds, and I think you're aware of this, we have dozens and dozens of weddings. A lot of times we could have 4 weddings going on a weekend. And, you know, maybe those weddings bring in 200 or 300 people, 100, 200 a piece. All of that has a major impact on the downtown Springfield area and the surrounding area. So I think in order to be successful as a facility and in order to be successful for the community, those are the events that you have to capture, other than the 10 days when you actually have the state fair.
Director, we had a question come in that I'll just shoot back to you, in which a person asked, what are the strengths of our particular state fair or our fairgrounds? Particular things that stand out in your mind?
So, you know, there's a number of things as far as strengths. Obviously, our track, we just talked about the Springfield Mile. It's known as one of the fastest tracks in the country.
Yep.
The same for trotting, exact same scenario. So horse racing there, you know, obviously from a horse show venue scenario, I'm told, and by going down, we've done horse shows this year, but unfortunately we weren't able to have too many spectators. What I hear consistently is we have one of the top 2 horse show facilities in the country. right here in Springfield. So those are things that we have to build on, as well as trying to get some of the other ancillary events and move forward.
And, I would add to that, some of the buildings are particularly unique. 35 years ago, I think it was, Governor Thompson saved a building, the Artisans building, from being destroyed and restored that building. And that is one of the nicer buildings for having events in Springfield. Let me,
Al, actually, when we talk about weddings, that is probably the building that's requested. So, to your point, it's gorgeous.
Yeah, and that building was very close to disappearing. Let me build a little bit on this particular topic, and let's talk about State Fair infrastructure. As I mentioned earlier, and the director also said, we are lucky that we've got an awful lot of historic buildings, some really unique and attractive buildings, but that also represents a challenge. Oftentimes, at least historically, they were not handicapped accessible, and there were other issues with the buildings. I am wondering, and Jerry, let me shoot this one back to you. What are some of the challenges that you're facing with regard to the capital needs of the Illinois State Fairgrounds? Do we have a pretty good sense what the backlog of projects might be at this stage?
We've got a pretty good sense of it, but having buildings this old, there are always things that pop up. So there's a 5-year plan, and it's a pretty extensive plan that I would be, more than willing to share some of those projects. But I did pull this from the conversation you had earlier, and it's important for people to put this in perspective. So we have on the grounds here 177 buildings. The exposition building was built in 1894. The grandstand was built in 1927. The dairy building was built in 1903. The Coliseum was built in 1901. The horse, cattle, and swine barns were built in 1912. And then the multi-purpose arena was in 2000, so kind of a gap there. But
well, I was alive for one of those.
But just to put it in perspective, when you talk about the different infrastructure needs, rehabbing, maintaining, the architecture is beautiful. Maintaining these buildings, the tradition is incredible. And it's very important that we do maintain them, but there's a cost of doing that business.
Yep. Thank you for that. Let me turn to the issue of partnerships with other organizations. Many state fairs, and when I say partnerships, that's usually a contractual relationship or a business relationship, but many state fairs, including Illinois, have worked with other organizations, both agriculture related as well as otherwise, to increase the use of the fairgrounds and attract more visitors. For example, Jerry mentioned Illinois has partnered with a lot of horse organizations from around the country, and that's kept our horse facilities busy much of the season. And in Indiana, you've lured sports teams and others to use your facilities. So, Marla, I'm going to turn to you first and just ask, are there other examples of how fairs and expos have expanded year-round utilization of their facilities? And then I'll ask the other two to jump in.
Well, and certainly, and I think we've touched on this, the year-round rental business, that is, I think, the number one situation. There are going to be some unique situations, for example, the amateur and some semi-professional sporting opportunities in certain markets is definitely going to be there. But expanding that rental business, treating it as a business, I think is really the driver on all of it. And again, we have numerous examples of where that is. I might want to point out a couple of situations, though, when we think about partnerships and when we think about that marriage between a government entity and for example, a for-profit, we are beginning to see the rise of interest in partnerships, agreements between the fair and the entity and, for example, hotel development, because that will help drive a lot of things. In fact, when I was at Georgia National, they are getting ready to announce and break ground on a hotel that will be built right on property and will actually connect to their main conference center. And so we're seeing that. I know Kentucky State Fair has in a number. LA County Fair, which does not fit in the same model, they've been operating a hotel, a Sheraton Hotel, for decades now. So I think that's one of the things that we're going to see as you see that the growth of the non-fair business, which is going to drive economic development within the community. In order to be fully robust, you've got to have the hotel infrastructure. And that is not to take away from the local hotel development. It's in partnership with the entire economic development that we're seeing. It's just there are certain events that you're going to have a lock on the market if you can get a hotel property right on grounds.
Right. Well, so speaking of that, Jerry, we got a question making note of the fact that our fairgrounds is on Route 66. And the questioner wanted to know if we are looking at ways to partner on events or activities that might be celebrating Route 66.
Al, we are, and as a matter of fact, right outside Gate 2, we are working on some remodel rehab, which would be in that theme. So, right up that alley. Now, I do want to go back, if you don't mind, Marla, two things. Number one, if you could help me get into contact with the people at the Georgia National Fairgrounds, that would be terrific. One of the things that our chief of staff here, Jeremy Flynn, and I have talked about extensively is the possibility of putting a hotel on the grounds here in Springfield. So, I mean, that makes tremendous sense to me. As I said, sometimes we'll have 4 weddings in a weekend and a number of other events. I couldn't agree with you more. And I think it's something that compounds the interest when you can actually stay on property, not have to drive anywhere.
So can I chime in just a second, Al? So Jerry, another one to look at is Ohio. Ohio State Fair has a motel on their property, and LA County Fair also has a hotel on their property. That might be another idea for you. And, when you were talking about partnerships, Al, the Denver Stock Show, the National Western, is going through a huge transformation, and they've partnered a lot with the university. And Marla, you may know more than I know about that, but I know their master plan has Colorado State involved at a high level.
It is a huge development, and it's widely supported by the community. There was a bond issue, many hundreds of millions of dollars put into this, but it's very unique because it will be an education center combined with CSU, but it will also be a huge attraction. The National Western draws about 500,000 people to Denver in January, so it is certainly a model. And it was really the city and the state got involved because there was the threat of taking the whole National Western outside of Denver. They were going to move it 40-50 miles away. And so now that they've turned it around, and it is certainly a unique partnership. When you think about the university extension, I mean, we're all married, fairs and university extension. It's a natural type of partnership that can develop. And that when you bring that synergy of the outreach, right? And when we think about what fairs do at their very heart and soul, we're touching the lives of people. We're changing the lives, especially of kids. So what better opportunity than to get involved with university and education, right?
Good. Cindy, thanks. Or pardon me, Marla, thank you. I've got a question for Cindy that one of our questioners wrote. They wanted to know who plans and strategizes for your organization. The individual notes you've got maybe a board that you utilize. Can you talk a little bit about that planning and strategy and oversight?
Sure, I'd be happy to. We have our governance structure is this State Fair Commission appointed by the governor, ex officios. We also have a fair board. and then the staff. And we work together collaboratively to develop a 3-year strategic plan. Jerry talked about a master plan. We've just updated our master plan 2 years ago with the property assets. But our strategic plan is on a 3-year cycle. We actually skipped this past 2020. I think we all would like to skip 2020. And so we're on a little hiatus, but the strategic plan will be updated this fall. And then in addition to that, the staff develops a business plan that supports on an annual basis that strategic plan, and being held accountable by a number of goals that we individually as well as the organization has on an annual basis.
Let me shift gears just a little bit. So we know that every state fair operates a little bit differently. Some operate totally independent of state monies. Others receive some state money. Some have a quasi relationship. But and I know even in the case, my experience working in the Edgar administration back in the 90s, we began weaning the state fair off of general revenue funds and trying to operate off of the revenues from the prior year. And so the amount of general revenue fund now dedicated to the state fair in Illinois has diminished dramatically. I'm curious what others are seeing, Jerry, maybe what you're seeing in terms of the support for state funding of fairs, whether that be for capital, whether it be for operations, et cetera. So maybe Marla, maybe I'll just toss that back to you and just say, are you seeing any national trends on that issue of public support?
I would hate to say that I could see anything national. It's still kind of hit and miss and really depends upon the states that in question. We actually did a survey of fairs. It'll soon be coming up on 2 years in May of 2019. And again, in fact, Al, we were talking in our advance. If you gave me a half hour, I would explain all about the varieties of state fairs, but we don't have a half hour to talk about that. But let me put this in perspective. Not every fair has a state fair. There are 22 fairs that have some tie with their state, but they vary from one that's run by the Department of Agriculture to those that are considered quasi agencies, right? And then there are 17 state fairs that are totally private, not for profit. Okay, so of the 22 that we say have some tie to government, 9 of those receive funding in terms of general operations support. 18 receive sometimes capital improvement support, but there's no guarantee. No one has any guarantee of any of all of that. And every state is struggling to find the ways to preserve what is a tremendous asset, because just the maintenance as we've alone, when you talk about Director, when you talk about all of those buildings, built over 100 years ago, the maintenance, the deferred maintenance to take care of acres of roofs, the cost is staggering. But if our states truly want to preserve their asset, then they've got to find a way to put money into those assets. And I believe strongly that the returns are going to be huge.
And it does seem that even in cases where states have moved away from major funding of their fairs, they still are there to support capital projects. And my guess is particularly on these more historic and notable buildings. But Cindy, could you talk just a little bit about Indiana and your relationship with state funding?
Yeah, so back in the 40s, we were included in the state property tax. So 0.007 cents, something like that. And that mill tax came to us probably about 2.2 million when property tax went away. And so from it going from property tax, then it went into the general fund. So that support has been there since the 40s. I would comment, Al, that Indiana was at a crossroads with massive amounts of deferred maintenance, infrastructure issues. just at a crossroads back in the early 90s. And two governors got together and created the State Fair Commission, and then the legislature came together and created a funding stream to put a massive amount of capital quickly into this asset, knowing that it was a gem of the state and their responsibility to take care of this property. And so that's kind of the quick history of when things changed. But it really was a kind of a hard stop of, do we still need this institution? Should it remain where it is? Should it move someplace else? And are we going to support it?
Yep.
Al,
Jerry,
if I
go
might
ahead.
just quickly, because this might be helpful in the conversation, and I don't want this to go away. You know, as states are looking at funding, they're also trying to figure out where is that money coming from. And the horse may already be out of the barn in Illinois, but the one that comes to mind is Colorado State Fair. They're getting certainly a lot of money off of recreational marijuana. When that bill was passed, whenever they enacted legislation to have recreational marijuana, the fair was part of that funding. So they get a stream off of that. And one that is a unique situation, it's different than the state fair run by the government, but Nebraska State Fair, I think it's worth to bring forward. Nebraska State Fair is a quasi-state agency. They basically run as a not-for-profit, as a 501c3. But whenever there was a move to take the property and move it away from Lincoln, they put it to Grand Island, 100 and some miles away from any population. And it's been extraordinarily successful because when they did that, the incentive was 10% from the state lottery proceeds are dedicated to the fair. And I pulled the numbers on that. They average $4.35 million a year, and they've had over $55 million piled into the fair since then. And then back to Colorado, they also, this was last year, they got a combined $400,000 just from their city and county governments as well. So 2 or 3 areas where the city and county are kicking in to make sure that that local asset is preserved.
Good. Jerry, I'm sure you would take those lottery monies, but I need to move us along. But any quick thoughts about your sense of expectations on state financing?
Yeah, so Al, as I said, you know, we finally had a capital bill in 2019, which we went over a decade without one. A lot of money was put into the fairgrounds here, thank God, because we were in desperate need after the budget stalemate that we went through for years. To your point, GRF is about 15% of our funding. Excuse me, about 73% is other state funds and 12% comes from federal funding. There's no doubt that we need to find ways and creative ways to work through the foundation, public-private partnerships to create funding for the fairgrounds here, as well as the fact of dealing with the legislature and the governor. We are very lucky that Governor Pritzker, number one, loves both state fairs and really enjoys the Springfield and DuQuoin State Fairgrounds and understands their significance.
So we only have a couple minutes left, but we've got a couple of questions here, and we got an excellent one. The comment was made that, you can go to the state fair and you see various forms of art, sometimes on display. The question is whether or not, I'm going to start with Marla on this, we've seen any examples where state fairs have expanded more into the area of art and the display of art on maybe not just during the 10 days of a fair. Any examples that stand out in your mind, or maybe Cindy, you're nodding, either one of you?
Cindy probably should be the first one. She's an artist as well. But so specifically, what comes to my mind right off the bat is Minnesota State Fairgrounds in terms of some of their most recent improvements, in that I can't recall exactly if specific sculptures and artworks were included, but the architecture alone is so visually appealing. So that comes to mind. Cindy, I think about going around all of your fairgrounds, and it just seems like there is art, whether it is in living landscapes or the infrastructure there. But That's a great question, and I will look for some more examples because my eye has not been necessarily focused on that, but Cindy probably has a better answer.
Yeah,
No, not necessarily, Marla. We have partnered with some of the art institutions to do some activation, not only during the fair, but year round. There was a festival at one time that elevated entrepreneur artists in the market. And so those are the kinds of things that we love to champion.
good. We got another questioner.
Hey, Al, real quick.
Yes, Jerry.
So you'll see in the near future a beautiful sculpture and statue right outside of the Coliseum. So that is absolutely a direction that we're heading in on the Illinois State Fairgrounds as well.
Great. We got a questioner who I think noticed that we talked about hotels being on the property. Cindy, you mentioned you had a couple of private businesses on your property. Question came in whether there are other types of business that we have seen set up on Fairgrounds, such as permanent restaurants or other permanent types of businesses. Any examples of that you've seen?
We're working with hopefully I'm not letting the cat out of the bag. We're working with a potential tenant right now that wants to put in a kind of a whiskey production distillery, and using one of those buildings that I've talked about that were only used for single use and use it 365 days out of the year. And so we're just in the final stages of working out the finances and what that would look like on a long-term basis. The other thing we have been looking at is there's percolating development, residential, multi-use development, and we're thinking about some of our outside lots and where there might be potential to maximize some of that space too.
Well, I think you piqued our interest with the word whiskey, so that's interesting. Marla, were you going to jump in on that one about other businesses?
Yeah, just one or two, and I'm not really sure. Cindy may know more about this, but I believe Iowa State Fair just entered into a partnership. They took it's a permanent building on the ground that was known as kind of a saloon type place during fair, but I believe they're operating it, if not totally year round, but there may be, it's at least operating during other events. I'm not sure of that. And then one that's not related to a state fairgrounds per se, but in the Eastern States, the Eastern States Exposition operates an historic tavern in their Starrowton Village, and it's open all year round, and it's like the place to eat in West Springfield, Massachusetts.
Yeah. Cindy, we got a question actually from a friend of mine, a former state legislator, Tom Ryder, who wanted to ask you, apparently you've got a classic car show that I think maybe is on your fair. Has that been good? Is that a good type of thing to be attracting to the fairgrounds?
Other than the Indiana State Fair, that is our #1 client. It's Mecum Car Show.
Yes.
It's a Mecum Car Auction. They're, I think they're out of Illinois, someplace in it, Rockford, maybe. I don't remember. But they have started out with us in a small little building, and it expanded to the point where they used the facility twice last year. And they use almost all of our year-round space in addition to some tents that they put in. But as I say, it's our #1 tenant.
Well, John has shown up. I feel like the Wizard of Oz has come out from behind the curtain. Let me toss it back to John.
I feel like the teacher turned the lights on and off at the end of the discussion. This has been terrific, but Al, if I just could, with the minute we have left, there was a question that you and your prepared questions had that I'd like to maybe close on from each of the panelists, but particularly Marla, I want to hear from you. What does the future of fairgrounds look like around America? Is this the right inflection point for reimagining their use for a modern world?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I believe the future is bright. Are there challenges? Absolutely. But these are unique assets all across the country, all across the globe. We've got to take advantage of that. And quite honestly, coming off of COVID, we're going to want to be together more than ever. So whatever that means for our fairs or new types of events that we want to create, I do believe that the future is bright.
Cindy, how about you?
I ditto Marla Calico. Absolutely optimistic about the future. It's going to change. It's going to be a little different. We got to be nimble, which we've proven over the last year. But just thinking about your asset is, like, as I said at the very beginning, your fairgrounds is absolutely beautiful, and you should be really proud of what you have.
Jerry, last word for you.
Yeah, John, I have to say in my last words that one of the things that I don't think we in Illinois do a good enough job of making sure people understand, ag's the #1 industry in the state of Illinois. 1 in 4 jobs are in some way, shape, or form ag related in the state. It's a $9 billion economic impact annually. It's this fairgrounds, what we have here, it's amazing. We've got to do everything we can to utilize it, not just for Springfield, the surrounding area, but for the state in general. And 4-H, FFA, our youth, they're the future of agriculture, the new ag economy in this state and in the country. So whatever we can do to push those messages forward, I'm all in, and multi-purposing the facility definitely makes sense as far as making sure it's around for generations to come. Thank you.
Terrific. Well, Marla and Cindy, thank you both for coming virtually to us from afar. And I think Al and Jerry and I would all be happy to host you to some corn dogs when you come to Springfield again. Jerry, thank you so much for participating in this and for your vision and leadership of the Department of Agriculture and our precious asset in the Illinois State Fair. And Al, thank you for a wonderful job of moderating. To all the listeners out there, thank you for your time today. This will be recorded and put up on the Community Foundation website as well as tn10.org. Thank you all. Stay tuned for more information here in the coming weeks. Have a great day.
Thanks, panel.